The sound of shattering glass echoed through the Eureka Springs saloon as Penelope James pressed herself into the corner, her eyes wide with terror. It wasn't the broken bottle that frightened her, but the booming voice that followed the shouting match between two drunken patrons that sent tremors through her slender frame. Every raised voice was a memory, every sudden movement a threat, and as the men's argument escalated, Penelope's breath came in short, desperate gasps. Arkansas Territory, 1878. The frontier town of Eureka Springs had grown around its healing waters, drawing the sick, the hopeful, and occasionally the desperate. Penelope had arrived 6 weeks ago, her few possessions packed in a weathered carpet bag, her past locked away behind tightly sealed lips. She'd found work at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, keeping to herself and jumping at shadows. "That's quite enough, gentlemen." The voice that cut through the chaos was quiet but carried unmistakable authority. It belonged to August Irwin, the tall, broad-shouldered rancher whose soft-spoken manner had earned him respect throughout the county. "I believe you've had your fill for tonight." The arguing men turned, ready to redirect their anger, but something in August's steady gaze made them reconsider. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even moved quickly from his position at the bar. Yet the tension in the room dissipated like morning mist under a summer sun. Penelope remained frozen in her corner, eyes fixed on the stranger who diffused the situation with nothing but calm words. When his gaze met hers, she looked away instantly, clutching the serving tray to her chest like a shield. "Miss," August called softly, approaching with measured steps. "Are you all right?" She nodded quickly, still not meeting his eyes. "Yes, sir, thank you." "August Irwin," he introduced himself, keeping a respectful distance. "I don't believe we've met." "Penelope James," she whispered, the words barely audible above the renewed chatter in the saloon. I should get back to work." August nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. "Of course." "Good evening, Miss James." As she hurried back to the kitchen, Penelope could feel his eyes following her. Not in the predatory way she'd grown accustomed to from men, but with something that felt uncomfortably like concern. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the Arkansas mountains surrounding Eureka Springs painted in shades of emerald and gold. Penelope rose early as always, eager to complete her chores at the boarding house before Mrs. Holloway assigned her additional tasks. The older woman had been kind enough to hire Penelope despite her lack of references, but she was a stern taskmaster who expected perfection. Penelope was sweeping the front porch when a familiar figure appeared, leading a dappled gray horse up the street. August Irwin tipped his hat politely as he approached. "Good morning, Miss James," he said, his voice as gentle as it had been the night before. "Mr. Irwin," she acknowledged with a small nod, her fingers tightening around the broom handle. "Beautiful day," he observed, making no move to come closer. "The mountains look particularly fine after yesterday's rain." Penelope glanced up at the peaks, then quickly back down. "Yes, sir, they do." A moment of silence stretched between them before August spoke again. "I'm delivering some fresh milk and eggs to Mrs. Holloway. My ranch is just a few miles outside of town." "The kitchen entrance is around back," Penelope said, gesturing vaguely. "Much obliged." He smiled, a small, careful thing that didn't show his teeth, before leading his horse around the building. Penelope released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There was something different about August Irwin. Most men in Eureka Springs were loud, boisterous creatures who took up space with their voices and their bodies. August seemed content to exist quietly, to move with deliberate calm. It unsettled her. Kindness always did. It was far easier to navigate the world expecting the worst from people. Over the next 2 weeks, August became a regular sight at the boarding house, delivering fresh provisions from his ranch and occasionally taking meals in the dining room. Penelope noticed that he always requested a table in the corner, away from the noisier guests. He always spoke in that same measured tone, never raising his voice even when a clumsy busboy spilled water across his lap. On a particularly busy evening, Mrs. Holloway ordered Penelope to serve in the dining room when one of the regular girls fell ill. The prospect of navigating the crowded, noisy space sent anxiety spiraling through Penelope's chest, but she couldn't afford to lose this position. "You'll be fine," Mrs. Holloway said briskly, thrusting a serving tray into Penelope's hands. "Table 6 needs their supper." Table 6 was August's usual corner. As Penelope approached with a tray of steaming food, she kept her eyes lowered, focusing on not spilling anything. "Evening, Miss James," August greeted her, his voice barely audible above the dining room chatter. "Good evening, Mr. Irwin," she replied, carefully setting down his plate. "Will there be anything else?" "Just some company if you can spare it," he said. When she looked up in surprise, he quickly added, "Only if you're comfortable, of course, and only when your duties allow." Penelope glanced around the room. Mrs. Holloway was occupied with a demanding family of travelers, and the other tables seemed well attended. Perhaps for a moment. August gestured to the empty chair across from him, making no sudden movements as she hesitantly lowered herself into it. "I haven't seen much of the town yet," he said conversationally. "Been too busy getting the ranch in order. Bought it from old Samuel Fletcher about a month ago." "I'm rather new myself," Penelope admitted, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "What brought you to Eureka Springs, if you don't mind my asking?" The question was innocent enough, but Penelope stiffened. "A fresh start," she said simply. August nodded, accepting the vague answer without pressing further. "The springs themselves are something, aren't they? People come from all over, hoping for healing." "Have you visited them?" Penelope asked, genuinely curious despite herself. "Not yet. Been meaning to, though my ailments are more of the spirit than the body." His smile was rueful. "The war left many of us that way." Penelope had almost forgotten about the conflict that had torn the nation apart not so many years ago. August would have been just old enough to fight. "You served, Union cavalry, enlisted at 18, saw things no young man should see." He spoke matter-of-factly, without drama or self-pity. "Been trying to find my peace ever since." Before Penelope could respond, a crash from across the room made her jump violently. A guest had knocked over a chair, and the resulting clatter sent her heart racing. August noticed her reaction, but didn't comment directly. "Reckon that's your cue to return to work," he said softly. "Thank you for the brief company, Miss James," she nodded, rising quickly. "Enjoy your meal, Mr. Irwin." As she hurried away, Penelope couldn't shake the feeling that August had seen straight through her carefully constructed facade. The thought was terrifying. The following Sunday brought a rare day off for Penelope. Most of the boarding house staff attended church services, but Penelope had long since lost her faith in a benevolent God. Instead, she chose to walk along the outskirts of town, enjoying the solitude and the beauty of the wilderness. She was crossing a small meadow when she spotted a familiar dappled gray horse grazing nearby. August was seated on a fallen log, whittling a small piece of wood with a pocket knife. Penelope considered turning back, but he'd already seen her. He raised his hand in greeting but didn't call out, giving her the choice to approach or continue on her way. After a moment's hesitation, she walked toward him. "Beautiful spot," August commented as she drew near. "I come here sometimes when the quiet of my own place gets too loud, if that makes any sense." "It does," Penelope said, surprising herself. "Sometimes silence can be overwhelming." August nodded, continuing his whittling. Up close, she could see he was carving a small bird. "Would you care to sit? No obligation to talk." Penelope considered the offer, then carefully settled on the far end of the log, leaving plenty of space between them. For several minutes, they simply existed in companionable silence, the only sounds the chirping of birds and the soft scrape of August's knife against wood. "What are you making?" she finally asked. "A chickadee," he replied, holding up the small carving. "My mother taught me. Said keeping your hands busy keeps the devil from finding work for them." "It's beautiful," Penelope said honestly. The tiny wooden bird was remarkably detailed, with delicate feathers and an expressive eye. "Keep it," August said, holding it out to her with an open palm. "I've dozens at home." Penelope hesitated before reaching out to take the carving, careful not to touch his hand. "Thank you." August smiled that same careful smile. "My pleasure." They fell back into silence, but it felt different now, expectant, as if words were gathering in the air between them. "Miss James," August finally said, his voice still soft but serious. "I hope you don't find me forward, but I've noticed that loud noises and sudden movements distress you greatly." Penelope stiffened, her fingers closing protectively around the wooden bird. "I don't ask out of idle curiosity," he continued. "Only to say that I understand. Not your specific circumstances, of course, but the way that past experiences can shape how we move through the world." Penelope stared at the ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I should go." "Of course," August said immediately, making no move to stop her. "I've overstepped. Please forgive me." She stood, clutching the carved bird tightly. "There's nothing to forgive, Mr. Irwin. You've been kind, but kindness can be deceptive." A shadow passed over his face. "Yes, I suppose it can be. Good day, Miss James." Penelope walked away quickly, fighting the unexpected urge to look back. August Irwin was dangerous, not because he was frightening, but because he wasn't. Because something in his quiet manner made her want to trust, and trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. The following week brought unseasonably heavy rains to Eureka Springs. The dirt streets turned to mud, and the usually clear springs became swollen and cloudy. Penelope found herself confined to the boarding house, the close quarters and restless guests fraying her already taut nerves. On the third day of downpour, a commotion at the front door drew Mrs. Holloway from the kitchen. Penelope continued kneading dough for the evening's bread, trying to ignore the raised voices. When Mrs. Holloway returned, her face was grave. "There's been an accident on the North Road," she announced to the kitchen staff. "Mr. Irwin's wagon overturned in the mud. He's been injured." Penelope's hands stilled in the dough. "How badly?" "Broken leg, from what Dr. Harrison says. They've brought him here since it was closer than his ranch." Mrs. Holloway turned to Penelope. "I need you to prepare the small room at the end of the hall. Make up the bed with fresh linens. Quickly now." Penelope hurried to obey, her mind racing. As she tucked clean sheets into the narrow bed, she could hear men's voices in the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sounds of someone in pain trying not to show it. The door opened, and two men entered, supporting August between them. His face was pale beneath his tan, his jaw clenched tight. When they helped him onto the bed, he couldn't suppress a groan of pain. "Thank you, gentlemen," Dr. Harrison said, ushering them out. He turned to Penelope. "I need to set this leg properly. Could you assist me?" Before Penelope could answer, August spoke through gritted teeth. "No need to trouble Miss James, doctor. I'm sure Mrs. Holloway can." "Mrs. Holloway is preparing medicines," the doctor interrupted. "Miss James is here now." Penelope nodded stiffly. "What do you need me to do?" "Hold his shoulders steady when I set the bone. It will be unpleasant." Penelope approached the bed hesitantly. August's eyes met hers, filled with apology. You don't have to, he said softly. It's all right, she replied, though her hands trembled as she positioned herself at the head of the bed. Brace him firmly, Dr. Harrison instructed, taking hold of August's leg. On 3. 1, 2, he pulled sharply before reaching 3, and August's body jerked violently. Instead of crying out, he made a terrible choking sound, as if physically restraining a scream. His hand found Penelope's arm and gripped it tightly, but even in his agony, she noted that he was careful not to hurt her. Well done, the doctor said briskly, already beginning to splint the leg. Clean break. Should heal properly if you stay off it for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks. August's voice was strained. I can't be away from my ranch that long. You can if you want to walk again, Dr. Harrison replied firmly. I'll send word to your foreman. What's his name? Martin Davis, August said, his breathing still uneven. But no arguments, the doctor interrupted. Miss James, ensure he drinks plenty of water. Mrs. Holloway will bring laudanum for the pain shortly. After the doctor left, an awkward silence filled the small room. August had released Penelope's arm but seemed reluctant to meet her eyes. I apologize for gripping you so tightly, he finally said, his voice low. I hope I didn't cause any harm. You didn't, Penelope assured him, moving to pour a glass of water from the pitcher on the nightstand. Here, you should drink. August accepted the glass with a slightly shaking hand. As he drank, Penelope noticed a long scar running along his collarbone, visible where his shirt had been loosened. Shiloh, August said, noticing her gaze. Confederate cavalry saber. I was lucky another inch and it would have caught my throat. Penelope looked away quickly. I should let you rest. Miss James, he called softly as she reached the door. Thank you. Not many would have stayed to help a virtual stranger through such an ordeal. We're not strangers, Mr. Irwin, she replied without thinking. Not anymore. His surprised smile followed her out of the room. Over the next few days, August proved to be a model patient, never complaining despite his obvious discomfort. Mrs. Holloway assigned Penelope to bring his meals and check on him periodically, tasks she approached with increasing ease. On the 4th evening, as she collected his dinner tray, August asked, Would you read to me? There's a book in my saddlebag, Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The hours get long when you're staring at the same 4 walls. Penelope retrieved the well-worn volume. You enjoy poetry, Mr. Irwin. Helps me make sense of things that defy explanation, he replied. And please call me August. After you've held a man down while his bones were realigned, I think we've moved beyond formalities. A small smile tugged at Penelope's lips. Very well, August. She settled into the chair beside his bed and began to read. Whitman's verses filled the small room, speaking of nature, humanity, and the complex beauty of existence. When she paused after finishing a particularly moving section, she found August watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. You read beautifully, he said softly. As if you understand every word, Penelope closed the book. My father was a professor of literature before. She trailed off, surprised at having revealed even this small piece of her past. He loved poetry, read it to us every evening. August didn't push for more. Instead, he simply said, he taught you well. Their evening readings became a ritual. After completing her duties, Penelope would spend an hour reading to August, their discussions of the poems gradually expanding to include other topics, books they'd enjoyed, places they'd seen, the changing seasons in the Ozark Mountains. What they didn't discuss was Penelope's obvious fear of loud noises and sudden movements, or the nightmares that sometimes left August calling out in his sleep. These were understood boundaries, respected by both. 2 weeks into August's recovery, Mrs. Holloway came to Penelope with an unexpected proposal. "Mr. Irwin's foreman was in town today," she said. "Their housekeeper has left family emergency back east. They need someone to manage the house while Mr. Irwin recovers. He asked specifically for you." Penelope's stomach tightened. "To live at his ranch, just until he's fully healed," Mrs. Holloway clarified. "The pay is better than what I can offer, and you'd have your own quarters. Martin Davis and his wife live on the property, so you wouldn't be alone with Mr. Irwin if that's your concern." "It's not that," Penelope said quickly. I don't know if I'm qualified." "Nonsense. You're the most capable girl I've hired in years." Mrs. Holloway gave her a rare smile. "Think about it. He needs an answer by tomorrow." That evening, instead of reading, Penelope sat silently in the chair beside August's bed. "Mrs. Holloway told you," he said finally. "Yes. It was Martin's idea, not mine," August explained. "Though I can't say I objected. You should know that if you decline, it changes nothing between us." Penelope studied his face, searching for hidden intentions and finding only openness. "Why me?" "Because you're competent, careful, and kind," he answered simply. "And because the house has become a disaster in my absence. Martin's skills lie with cattle, not housekeeping." A small laugh escaped her, surprising them both. "That's an honest answer, at least." "I don't give any other kind," August replied, his eyes serious despite his smile. "There would be clear boundaries, Penelope. Your own room with a lock on the door, free time to do as you please. And when I'm healed, you can return to Mrs. Holloway's or stay on permanently, whatever you wish." The use of her first name didn't escape Penelope's notice, but she didn't correct him. Instead, she found herself considering the offer seriously. The boarding house was safe but confining with Mrs. Holloway's watchful eye and the constant flow of strangers. The idea of a quieter environment was undeniably appealing. "I'll need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need." That night, Penelope lay awake in her narrow attic room, turning the decision over in her mind. Trust didn't come easily to her, not anymore. But in the weeks since meeting August, she'd begun to believe that perhaps not all men were like her father or Thomas Harper, the man whose marriage proposal she'd fled St. Louis to escape. By morning, she'd made her decision. 3 days later, Penelope found herself in a wagon beside Martin Davis, heading toward the Irwin Ranch. August had been transported the day before, his leg carefully secured for the journey. "It's not fancy," Martin warned as they crested a hill, revealing a sturdy 2-story farmhouse nestled in a valley. "But it's solid. Good land, good water. August has big plans for it." Surrounding the main house were several outbuildings, a large barn, and corrals containing horses and cattle. Beyond stretched meadows and forests, the landscape rolling toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Penelope said honestly. Martin's wife, Sarah, greeted them at the door, a plump, cheerful woman whose easy smile immediately put Penelope at ease. "Thank heavens you're here," she exclaimed. "I've been trying to keep up with the house and help Martin with the ranch work. It's been a losing battle on both fronts." Penelope's quarters proved to be far more comfortable than she'd anticipated, a cozy room on the first floor with a window overlooking a small garden. As promised, the door had a sturdy lock. August was settled in the study, which had been converted into a temporary bedroom to spare him the challenge of stairs. When Penelope checked on him that evening, she found him sitting up, reviewing ledgers despite his obvious fatigue. "You should be resting," she admonished gently. "Cattle don't care if their owner has a broken leg," he replied, though he set the ledger aside. "How are you settling in?" "Well," Penelope said, "Sarah has been very kind in showing me around. She's good people. Martin, too. They've been with me since I purchased the ranch." August gestured to the chair near his makeshift bed. "Will you read tonight? I've missed our sessions." Penelope hesitated. This was different from the boarding house, where Mrs. Holloway or another staff member might enter at any moment. Here they were truly alone. Sensing her uncertainty, August added softly, "The door can remain open, and Sarah will be bringing my evening medicines shortly." Penelope nodded, taking the seat and accepting the book he offered. It was a different volume this time, Tennyson's Idylls of the King. As she read, Penelope became aware of a subtle shift in their dynamic. In the boarding house, August had been the patient and she the caretaker. Here in his home, the balance of power had shifted. Yet strangely, she didn't feel threatened by this change. Perhaps because August himself seemed unchanged, still soft-spoken, still careful in his movements, still respectful of her boundaries. The days fell into a rhythm. Penelope rose early to prepare breakfast and attend to the house. August's condition improved gradually, allowing him to move from bed to a chair by the window, where he could observe the ranch activities. In the evenings, they would read together, their literary discussions growing more animated as Penelope's comfort in his presence increased. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, August asked a question that caught her off guard. "The wooden bird I carved for you, did you keep it?" Penelope's hand instinctively went to her pocket, where the small carving had been a constant companion. "Yes," she admitted, withdrawing it to show him. "It's beautifully made." August smiled, pleased. "I'm glad you liked it. I've been working on something else now that I'm confined to this chair." He reached for a small wooden box on the table beside him. "Would you look and tell me what you think?" Penelope accepted the box and opened it carefully. Inside was an exquisite carving of a hummingbird in flight, its wings caught in a moment of suspended motion. "August," she breathed, lifting it gently. "This is remarkable." "It's yours if you'd like it," he said, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. "I thought about how you move, sometimes quick and light, especially when you're startled. Reminded me of a hummingbird." The observation was so unexpected yet so accurate that Penelope was momentarily speechless. No one had ever paid such careful attention to her before, not in a way that felt like genuine interest rather than scrutiny. "Thank you," she finally said, closing her fingers carefully around the delicate carving. "I'll treasure it." That night, after retiring to her room, Penelope placed both wooden birds on her windowsill. The chickadee and the hummingbird looked right together, as if they belonged side by side. The thought brought an unfamiliar warmth to her chest, a feeling dangerously close to hope. As August's recovery progressed, Penelope found herself sharing more of her past with him, small pieces at first, then larger ones. She told him about growing up in Boston, her father's position at Harvard, her mother's death when Penelope was 16. What she didn't share was what came after her father's descent into alcoholism and rage, the beatings that followed any perceived disobedience, her escape to St. Louis, and subsequent entanglement with Thomas Harper. Some wounds were still too raw to expose, even in the gentle light of August's attention. In turn, August spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his difficult years in the war, and his wanderings afterward. "I was looking for something," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "though I couldn't have told you what it was." "And did you find it?" Penelope asked. August's eyes met hers briefly before returning to the painted sky. "I'm beginning to think so." The air between them hummed with unspoken possibility. As summer turned to early autumn, August began walking with the aid of a crutch. Dr. Harrison pronounced his recovery remarkable and predicted he'd be back to full strength by winter. This pronouncement, while welcome, reminded Penelope that her position at the ranch was temporary. Soon, August would no longer need her assistance, and she would need to decide whether to return to town or accept his offer to stay on permanently. The question weighed on her mind as she prepared dinner one evening. Sarah and Martin had gone into town for supplies and wouldn't return until the following day, leaving Penelope and August alone on the ranch for the first time. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the back door open. The sudden appearance of a stranger in the kitchen doorway, a rough-looking man with hard eyes, sent her heart racing. "Well, ain't you a pretty thing?" the man drawled, blocking the exit. "Ranch hands said the boss had hired himself a looker." Penelope gripped the edge of the table, trying to control her breathing. "Mr. Irwin is in the study. If you're looking for work, you should speak with him." "Oh, I ain't looking for work, sweetheart." The man took a step closer, his grin revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Just some hospitality." Penelope's mind raced through her options. The back door was behind the intruder. The knife block was within reach, but she'd never been violent, even in self-defense. Before she could decide, the man lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Let's get better acquainted. Take your hands off her." August's voice cut through the kitchen, deadly quiet but with an edge Penelope had never heard before. He stood in the doorway, leaning on his crutch, his other hand holding a revolver pointed steadily at the intruder. The man froze, then slowly released Penelope's arm. "Now, hold on." "I was just being friendly." "You're being a trespasser and a threat," August corrected, his voice still unnaturally calm. "Step away from Miss James and state your business, or I'll assume the worst and act accordingly." Something in August's tone, the absolute certainty behind the quiet words, made the intruder back up hastily. "I heard you might be hiring, that's all." "We're not," August said flatly. "The North Road will take you back to town. I suggest you use it. Now." The man glanced between August's unwavering gun and Penelope's pale face before backing toward the door. "No need for that iron, mister. I'm going." August followed at a careful distance, his movements measured despite the crutch. When the sound of retreating hoofbeats confirmed the man's departure, he returned to find Penelope still frozen in place, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Penelope," he said softly, setting the revolver on a high shelf before approaching her. "You're safe. He's gone." She nodded mechanically, but her eyes were unfocused, seeing something beyond the kitchen walls. August recognized the look he'd seen it in the eyes of too many soldiers after battle. "Can you hear me?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. When she nodded again, he continued, "Good. I need you to breathe with me, slowly. In through your nose, out through your mouth." He demonstrated, and after several false starts, Penelope began to match his rhythm. Gradually, her breathing steadied and her eyes cleared. "There you are," August said, relief evident in his voice. "Would you like to sit down?" "No," she whispered. I need to finish dinner." "Dinner can wait," August countered gently. "Let's go to the sitting room. The fire's already lit." After a moment's hesitation, Penelope allowed him to guide her. In the sitting room, she sank into the armchair closest to the fire, while August took the seat opposite, careful to give her space. "I'm sorry," she said finally, staring into the flames. "I should have handled that better." "You have nothing to apologize for," August assured her. "That man was threatening and intrusive. Your reaction was entirely normal." Penelope shook her head slightly. "Not for a grown woman." "For anyone who has experienced trauma," August corrected quietly, "which I suspect you have." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Penelope could feel August waiting, patient and undemanding, giving her the space to either share or keep her silence. "My father," she began, the words feeling strange in her mouth after so long unspoken. "After my mother died, he changed, started drinking, and when he drank, he became violent." August didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or expressions of pity, He simply listened, his steady presence an anchor as Penelope finally released the story she'd kept locked away. He was a respected professor. No one would have believed me. And he was always so careful, never leaving marks where they could be seen. Her hands twisted in her lap. He would shout first. That was the warning. If I could get away before the shouting stopped, I'd be safe. But if not... She trailed off, unable to articulate the beatings that had followed. She didn't need to. The understanding in August's eyes told her he could fill in the blanks. I ran away when I was 21, made it to St. Louis, found work as a seamstress. Penelope swallowed hard. That's where I met Thomas Harper. He was a client wanted suits made for his business dealings. He was charming, attentive. When he proposed after 3 months, I accepted. August remained silent, though his jaw tightened slightly. It wasn't until after our engagement that I saw the signs, Penelope continued, the same ones I'd seen in my father. The way his voice would rise when he was displeased, how he'd grip my arm just a little too tightly. Small things, but I knew where they led. So you left, August supplied when she faltered. Penelope nodded. 2 days before the wedding. I took what I could carry and bought a ticket for the furthest train leaving that day. Ended up in Little Rock, then made my way to Eureka Springs when I heard they needed help at the boarding house. She finally looked up to meet August's gaze directly. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Sometimes stories need to be told, he said simply. Kept inside, they fester. Given voice, they begin to lose their power. Penelope considered this. Does that apply to your nightmares as well? A shadow passed over August's face. Perhaps. The war stories are rarely suitable for mixed company. I'm stronger than I look, Penelope said softly. August studied her for a long moment before nodding. That you are, Penelope James. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. The admission hung between them, fraught with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. After that night, something shifted between them. The careful distance August had maintained began to feel less like respect for boundaries and more like an unnecessary formality. For her part, Penelope found herself seeking his company even when her duties didn't require it. They began taking short walks together as August continued to heal, exploring the ranch property at a leisurely pace. During one such walk, they paused by a small creek that cut through the eastern pasture. This land reminds me of childhood summers in Pennsylvania, August remarked, watching the water bubble over smooth stones. Before the war changed everything. You never speak of your time in the cavalry, Penelope observed, only that you served. August was quiet for so long that Penelope thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant as if coming from somewhere far away. I was a scout, primarily. Good with horses, good with directions. Spent a lot of time alone behind enemy lines. His eyes remained fixed on the flowing water. Saw things. Did things, the kind of things that follow a man home. Penelope waited, sensing there was more. At Gettysburg, my unit was charged with holding a strategic position. We were outnumbered, outgunned. August's voice grew even quieter. I watched my friends die one by one, and I killed men, Penelope, men who probably had wives and children waiting for them. Men who believed in their cause just as strongly as I believed in mine. He finally looked at her, his eyes haunted. That's why I speak softly now, after so much shouting, so much death. Quietness feels like penance. Without thinking, Penelope reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact between them. And the slow movements, a sad smile touched August's lips. In battle, everything is fast, chaotic. Afterward, I found that deliberate movements helped calm the storm inside me. And then I met you, and I saw how you flinched at sudden gestures, and It made sense to be even more mindful. They stood in silence, hands linked, as the creek gurgled its endless song. "We're quite the pair, aren't we?" Penelope finally said, a hint of wry humor in her voice. "Both haunted by our pasts." August's fingers tightened gently around hers. "Perhaps that's why we found each other." As autumn deepened, bringing cooler days and frost-touched mornings, Dr. Harrison declared August fully healed. "No more crutch," he pronounced after a thorough examination. "Though I'd avoid breaking Broncos for another month, just to be safe." The news should have been cause for celebration, but it cast a shadow over Penelope's thoughts. With August recovered, her position as his caretaker was effectively ended. The decision she'd been postponing could no longer be delayed. That evening, as they sat before the fire in what had become their nightly ritual, August broached the subject himself. "I imagine you'll be wanting to return to town now," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned she'd be happy to have you back." Penelope stared into the flames, weighing her response. The past months at the ranch had been healing in ways she hadn't anticipated. The quiet routine, the open spaces, the absence of strangers all had combined to ease the constant vigilance she'd maintained for years. And then there was August himself. His steady presence had become as essential to her as breath, though she'd been reluctant to acknowledge it. The thought of returning to town, of seeing him only occasionally when he came in for supplies, created a hollow feeling in her chest. "Unless," August continued when she didn't immediately respond, "you'd consider staying, not as my caretaker but as my housekeeper." The position would be permanent, with increased wages. Penelope looked up to find him watching her intently, something unspoken in his eyes. "Just as your housekeeper," the question hung between them, loaded with meaning. August set his book aside and leaned forward slightly. "Penelope," he began, his voice softer than usual, "over these past months you've become important to me. More than important. Essential." Her heart began to race, but not with the familiar panic. This was something different, a fluttering, hopeful sensation. "I had planned to be more eloquent about this," August continued with a self-deprecating smile. "Had a whole speech prepared. But the truth is simple. I care for you deeply. I believe you may feel something similar for me, and I'm hoping you'll consider staying not just as my employee but as whatever you're comfortable with." Penelope found herself unable to speak, overwhelmed by the directness of his words and the emotions they stirred. "You don't need to answer now," August added quickly. "Take all the time you need. And know that whatever you decide, your position here is secure, no conditions attached." "August," Penelope finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know if I can be what you want." His expression softened further. "All I want is you, exactly as you are. With all your strengths and struggles, just as you've accepted mine." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of you, never of you, but of letting myself trust in something good." August nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Fear is a natural response to having been hurt. But sometimes, Penelope, sometimes life offers us second chances, opportunities to heal, to find joy despite our scars." He slowly extended his hand, palm up, leaving the choice to her. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance for both of us." Penelope looked at his outstretched hand, strong, capable, yet offering rather than demanding. With a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. "I'll stay," she said softly, "not just as your housekeeper." The smile that illuminated August's face was unlike any she'd seen before, unguarded, radiant with hope. Still moving with his characteristic deliberation, he brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. In that moment, Surrounded by the warm glow of firelight, Penelope felt something long dormant within her begin to awaken a cautious but unmistakable joy. The transition from employee to something more was navigated with the same careful consideration that characterized all of August's actions. He courted Penelope with old-fashioned formality walks in the early evening, carefully planned picnics when weather permitted, gifts of books and small carved animals that gradually populated her room. Physical affection developed slowly, beginning with held hands and progressing to brief embraces. The first time August kissed her a gentle touch of lips as they stood watching the sunset from the porch, Penelope was surprised by her own response. Instead of the fear or hesitation she'd expected, she felt only warmth and a curious sense of rightness. As winter descended on the Ozarks, bringing snow and bitter winds, the ranch settled into its cold weather routines. Cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, repairs were made to outbuildings, and preparations begun for spring calving. August threw himself into the work, returning each evening tired but satisfied, while Penelope managed the household with growing confidence. Their evenings remained sacred time spent reading by the fire, sharing the events of their day, occasionally playing chess, at which Penelope proved surprisingly adept. It was during one such evening, as a December blizzard raged outside, that August surprised her with an unexpected question. "Would you consider traveling with me to St. Louis after the new year?" he asked, moving his bishop across the chessboard. Penelope's hand froze over her knight. "St. Louis? I have business there meeting with cattle buyers," August explained. "But that's not the only reason I'm asking." "I thought perhaps—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps you might want to confront some of your past, on your own terms with me beside you." Penelope's immediate instinct was refusal. St. Louis held nothing but painful memories: her failed engagement, the humiliation of fleeing, the fear of Thomas Harper's potential retribution. "You don't have to decide now," August continued, noting her expression. "And if you choose not to go, I understand completely. But sometimes facing our fears diminishes their power over us." "Is that why you returned to Gettysburg last year?" Penelope asked, remembering a story he'd shared about visiting the battlefield on the anniversary of the battle. August nodded solemnly. "It was difficult, but necessary." Afterward, the nightmares came less frequently. Penelope considered this as she moved her piece. "I'll think about it." 2 days later, as they sat at breakfast, Penelope gave her answer. "I'll go to St. Louis with you," she said quietly, "but I have conditions." August looked up from his coffee, surprise and pleasure evident in his expression. "Name them." "We stay far from the neighborhood where Thomas lives. We don't announce our presence unnecessarily, and—" she took a steadying breath. "And if I decide I need to leave for any reason, we leave. No questions asked." "Agreed to all," August said without hesitation. "We'll stay at the Planters House Hotel. It's on the opposite side of town from Harper's usual haunts, based on what you've told me. And we'll leave the moment you say the word, regardless of my business status." The relief on Penelope's face was evident. "Thank you." "No, thank you," August replied seriously. "I know this isn't easy. Your courage continues to amaze me." The journey to St. Louis was planned for mid-January, when the worst of winter's fury would likely have passed. As the date approached, Penelope found her anxiety increasing. Nightmares, which had become less frequent during her time at the ranch, returned with vivid intensity. August, true to his nature, didn't push or pry. Instead, he offered silent support, a comforting presence when she woke gasping from dreams, a steady hand when her own trembled at the mention of the upcoming trip. 3 days before their scheduled departure, Penelope finally confessed her deepest fear. What if we encounter Thomas? What if he sees me and decides to reassert his claim? They were sitting in the study, reviewing the travel arrangements. August set aside the papers and gave her his full attention. Thomas Harper has no claim on you, he said firmly but quietly. Not legally, not morally, not in any way that matters. But if he confronts us, then I will handle it, August interrupted, a rare occurrence that emphasized his seriousness. Calmly and within the bounds of the law, but make no mistake, Penelope, no one will harm you while I draw breath. Something in his tone, the absolute certainty behind the softly spoken words, finally penetrated Penelope's anxiety. This was the same man who had faced down the intruder in their kitchen months ago. The same soldier who had survived the bloodiest battles of the war. Beneath his gentle exterior lay a core of steel. "I believe you," she said simply. The journey to St. Louis took 3 days by train, with overnight stops in Little Rock and Memphis. Penelope found herself surprisingly calm as they approached the city, August's steady presence beside her acting as a buffer against rising panic. The Planter's House Hotel proved to be as grand as August had described, a 4-story edifice of red brick and white stone, with uniformed doormen and a lobby adorned with marble columns and crystal chandeliers. "Mr. and Mrs. Irwin," August told the desk clerk as he signed the register. "We have a reservation for a suite." Penelope stiffened slightly at the false pretense, though she understood its necessity. An unmarried couple traveling together would draw unwanted attention. Their suite was spacious and elegantly appointed, with separate bedrooms adjoining a shared sitting room. "Will this be comfortable for you?" August asked once they were alone. "I can request different accommodations if you prefer." "This is fine," Penelope assured him, touched by his continued concern for her comfort. "Better than fine. It's lovely." August smiled, relief evident in his expression. "Good. My meeting isn't until tomorrow afternoon. Would you like to rest or perhaps take a short walk?" The hotel gardens are supposed to be quite impressive, even in winter. "A walk sounds wonderful," Penelope decided. After days of travel, the prospect of fresh air and exercise was appealing. As they strolled through the hotel's manicured grounds, Penelope found herself relaxing incrementally. St. Louis was a large city. The odds of encountering Thomas were slim, especially in this upscale neighborhood far from his usual haunts. That evening, August surprised her with dinner reservations at the hotel's renowned restaurant. "A celebration," he explained as they were seated at a table near a crackling fireplace. "Of your bravery in coming here and of us." Penelope felt a flush of pleasure at the simple word. Over the past months, us had come to represent something she'd never thought possible, a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than fear or obligation. As they enjoyed their meal, August spoke of his business plans, expanding the ranch, breeding better stock, possibly purchasing adjacent land that had recently come available. "I want to build something lasting," he explained, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Something worth passing on someday." The implications of his words weren't lost on Penelope. This wasn't just talk of business, it was talk of future, of permanence. Before she could formulate a response, a commotion near the restaurant entrance drew their attention. A party of well-dressed men and women was being seated across the room, their loud laughter and conversation carrying over the more subdued murmurs of other diners. Penelope's blood froze in her veins as she recognized one of the men, tall and impeccably dressed, with a meticulously groomed beard and cold eyes that had once looked at her with possessive hunger. "Thomas Harper." "Penelope." August's concerned voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's wrong?" She couldn't speak, couldn't tear her gaze away from the man who had featured in so many of her nightmares. When August followed her line of sight, his expression shifted subtly. "Is that him?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Penelope nodded almost imperceptibly. "Do you want to leave?" The question was immediate, without a hint of hesitation or disappointment despite their half-finished meal. Penelope considered it. Part of her, the part that had fled St. Louis in terror 2 years ago, screamed to run. But another part, stronger than she'd realized, resisted. "No," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "No, I don't want to give him that power." Pride flashed in August's eyes. "All right. But if you change your mind at any point, I know," she interrupted with a small smile. No questions asked. They continued their meal, though Penelope was acutely aware of Harper's presence across the room. By some miracle, he seemed not to notice her, absorbed as he was in holding court among his companions. As they were finishing dessert, however, fate intervened. Harper rose, apparently intending to visit the hotel's cigar lounge, his path taking him directly past their table. Penelope tensed, her fingers tightening around her fork. August reached across the table, covering her hand with his own, a silent reminder of his presence. Thomas Harper was nearly past them when something made him pause. He turned slowly, his gaze falling on Penelope with initial confusion that quickly transformed into shocked recognition. "Miss James." The familiar voice sent shivers down Penelope's spine. "Well, this is unexpected." August's hand remained steady over hers as he looked up at Harper with polite inquiry. "You're acquainted with my wife," the lie flowed smoothly, a shield against social impropriety. Harper's eyes narrowed as he glanced between them, clearly calculating. "We were briefly engaged," he said finally, his tone suggesting something sordid, "before she disappeared without a word. Quite the scandal at the time." "How unfortunate," August replied mildly, "though I must say her arrival in Arkansas proved fortunate for me." Harper's jaw tightened at August's calm response. "Indeed, and you are?" "August Irwin, cattle rancher from Eureka Springs." August still hadn't raised his voice or made any sudden movements, but something in his steady gaze made Harper shift uncomfortably. "I see." Harper's attention returned to Penelope, who had yet to speak. "You've done well for yourself, my dear. From seamstress to rancher's wife, quite the elevation." The condescension in his tone finally broke through Penelope's paralysis. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I wish you a pleasant evening, but we have nothing further to discuss." Harper's expression darkened briefly before he forced a smile. "Of course, how rude of me to interrupt your meal." He gave a slight bow. "Mrs. Irwin." As he walked away, Penelope released a shaking breath. August squeezed her hand gently. "You were magnificent," he murmured. "Absolutely magnificent." Later, in the privacy of their suite, Penelope found herself oddly energized by the encounter. "I always imagined I'd be terrified if I saw him again," she confessed as they sat before the fire in the sitting room. "And I was initially. But then, it was as if he shrank before my eyes. He seemed smaller somehow, less threatening." "People who rely on intimidation often do when confronted," August observed. "You faced him on your terms with your strength. He wasn't expecting that." Penelope nodded thoughtfully. "When I ran from St. Louis, I was running from more than just Thomas. I was running from myself, from the weak, frightened person I'd become after years with my father. I couldn't imagine standing up to anyone, least of all a man like Thomas Harper. And now," August asked softly, "now I know I'm stronger than I believed." She met his gaze directly. "Thanks in no small part to you." August shook his head slightly. "I provided safety, perhaps. The strength was always yours." The remaining days in St. Louis passed without further incident. August's business meetings went well, securing contracts that would ensure the ranch's prosperity for the coming year. Penelope, emboldened by her encounter with Harper, ventured out to visit some of her favorite places from her time in the city: the public gardens, the riverfront, the small bookshop where she'd spent countless hours. On their final evening, after a particularly successful negotiation, August suggested a celebratory dinner at a small, intimate restaurant near the river. "It's our last night," he explained as they were seated at a corner table adorned with fresh flowers and candles. "I wanted it to be special." Something in his tone made Penelope's heart beat faster. August seemed unusually nervous, his customary calm replaced by a subtle tension she couldn't quite interpret. After they'd ordered and wine had been poured, August reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box not unlike the ones that had contained his carved animals, but slightly larger. "I've been carrying this since we left the ranch," he admitted, turning the box in his hands. "Waiting for the right moment. After watching you confront your past with such courage, I think perhaps this is it." He placed the box on the table between them, his movements deliberate as always. "Penelope James, you came into my life when I least expected it but most needed it. You've shown me that quiet strength often surpasses loud bravado, that healing is possible even after deep wounds, and that second chances are worth taking." With gentle fingers, he opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond, flanked by tiny sapphires that caught the candlelight. "I'm asking if you'll consider one more change from Miss James to Mrs. Irwin. For real this time, not just as a convenient fiction." His voice remained soft, but there was an undercurrent of emotion that made it slightly unsteady. "Will you marry me, Penelope?" For a moment, Penelope couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the sight of the ring and the sincerity in August's eyes. Her silence stretched long enough that uncertainty began to cloud his expression. "I understand if you need time," he began, but Penelope reached across the table to place her fingers gently over his lips. "Yes," she said simply, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, August, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough to any doubts she might have harbored. With hands that trembled slightly not from fear, but from happiness, she allowed him to slide the ring onto her finger. "It fits perfectly," she marveled, admiring how the stones caught the light. "I had it made by a jeweler here in St. Louis," August admitted. "Sarah helped me with the size. The sapphires reminded me of your eyes." Penelope looked up from the ring to find August watching her with such tenderness that it nearly took her breath away. "I never thought I'd find this," she confessed softly. "Someone who would understand, who wouldn't try to change me or fix me but would simply accept me exactly as I am." "That's what love is," August replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not blind adoration or passionate obsession, but clear-eyed acceptance, seeing someone truly seeing them and choosing them anyway, imperfections and all." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. "When can we be married?" August's smile widened. "As soon as you'd like. Spring, perhaps. When the wildflowers bloom in the meadow behind the house." The image was so perfect, so aligned with the quiet beauty of their relationship that Penelope could only nod, happiness closing her throat. They returned to the ranch the following week to find spring already making early inroads against winter's grip. Tender green shoots were appearing in sheltered spots, and the air carried the promise of renewal. The news of their engagement was met with delight by Martin and Sarah, who had clearly suspected August's intentions before their departure. "About time," Martin declared, clapping August on the shoulder. "Never seen a man so besotted." "Or a woman so perfectly matched to him," Sarah added, embracing Penelope warmly. We couldn't be happier for you both. Preparations for a spring wedding began immediately. Penelope, who had once dreaded the elaborate ceremonies Thomas had envisioned, found herself enjoying the simple planning for their small celebration. August suggested inviting only a few close friends and the ranch hands who had become like family. Unless you'd prefer something more formal, he added, always mindful of her preferences. No, Penelope assured him. This is exactly what I want, just us and the people who matter most under the open sky. As winter reluctantly retreated, and spring established its dominion over the Ozarks, Penelope found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. From the terrified woman who had flinched at every raised voice to someone capable of facing down her past, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it hadn't been miraculous at all, she realized. It had been gradual, a slow healing fostered by safety, respect, and the patient love of a man who understood trauma because he'd experienced it himself. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the meadow behind the ranch house carpeted with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. A simple arch of twisted branches had been erected, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons under Sarah's expert guidance. In her room, Penelope smoothed the fabric of her dress, a creation of cream-colored silk with delicate lace accents, ordered from a dressmaker in St. Louis. It was elegant without being ostentatious, perfectly suited to the occasion and to her own tastes. A soft knock at the door heralded Sarah's arrival. "It's time," she said, her eyes widening appreciatively at the sight of Penelope in her finery. "Oh, my dear, you look absolutely radiant." Penelope took a deep breath, surprised to find not a trace of the anxiety that had plagued her previous engagement. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. The small gathering of guests stood as she emerged from the house. At the far end of the improvised aisle, beneath the flowering arch, stood August, tall and straight in a new black suit, his eyes finding hers immediately. As Penelope walked toward him, carrying a simple bouquet of wildflowers, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This man, with his soft voice and careful movements, had never sought to control or possess her. Instead, he had created space for her to heal, to grow, to become fully herself. When she reached him, August extended his hand, that same open-palmed invitation he'd offered months ago by the firelight. And just as she had then, Penelope placed her hand in his without hesitation. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, August leaned down to kiss her with such gentle reverence that tears sprang to Penelope's eyes. The celebration that followed was joyful but understated exactly what they had wanted. As evening approached, bringing cooler air and the first stars, August led Penelope away from the festivities toward a small rise overlooking the ranch. "Happy?" he asked softly as they gazed out over the land that was now truly their home. "More than I ever thought possible," Penelope replied honestly, leaning against his solid warmth. "You've given me so much, August. We've given each other a second chance," he corrected gently. "A new beginning." As they stood together in the gathering twilight, Penelope reflected that this was perhaps the greatest gift of all, not just love, but the opportunity to build something new from the ashes of painful pasts. Something strong and lasting, like the ranch spread out before them, rooted in mutual respect and blooming with possibilities. "What are you thinking?" August asked, his arm secure around her waist. Penelope smiled up at him, no longer afraid to meet his gaze or accept his touch. "I'm thinking that for two damaged souls, we've managed to create something rather beautiful together." August's answering smile was tender as he bent to kiss her forehead. "And we're just getting started, Mrs. Irwin. just getting started. The years that followed proved the truth of his words. Under their joint stewardship, the ranch prospered and expanded. August's cattle operation became known throughout the territory for its quality stock, while Penelope established a small but thriving garden that supplied not only their table, but also the growing Eureka Springs farmers market. Their family grew as well. A son, William, arrived a year after their wedding, a quiet, thoughtful boy with his father's steady temperament. 2 years later came Elizabeth, whose fiery spirit and fearlessness constantly amazed Penelope, who saw in her daughter's confidence all that she herself had lacked as a child. Through it all, the joys and challenges of ranch life, parenthood, and the changing times, August remained true to his nature. His voice stayed gentle, his movements deliberate, his patience seemingly inexhaustible. And Penelope, though she would always startle at unexpected loud noises, found that the paralyzing fear that had once defined her existence gradually faded to a distant memory. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard with the ranch dogs, August presented Penelope with a special gift, a wooden box containing 2 exquisitely carved birds, a chickadee and a hummingbird, just like the first gifts he had given her, but now joined by a nest containing 2 smaller birds. "Our family," he said simply as she ran her fingers over the delicate carving. "The life we've built together." Penelope looked up at the man who had taught her that love needn't be loud to be powerful, that strength often came wrapped in gentleness, and that even the most wounded heart could heal given enough time and tenderness. "Thank you," she said softly, leaning against his shoulder. "For speaking softly when the world was too loud, for moving slowly when everything was rushing past, for giving me the time I needed to find my courage." August pressed a kiss to her temple, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Thank you for finding it," he murmured against her hair. "And for sharing your life with me. Every single day, I'm grateful you stayed." As the sun set over the Ozarks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Penelope watched her children's laughter and felt her husband's steady presence beside her. The life they'd created together wasn't perfect, no life ever was, but it was rich and full and marked by a deep, abiding love that had healed them both. And that, Penelope knew with absolute certainty, was more than enough. It was everything.